problem.
All right, let's get started with our afternoon session. Welcome back. Hope you had a good lunch. So in the afternoon, the audience, both attending in person and online, will engage in general discussion with our panelists. The discussants will be invited to speak about their own experiences with the streaming, and then about their experiences with streaming as teachers and parents. We will also reflect upon what we have heard during the morning session and propose some steps for going forward with changes in Ontario math curriculum and education in general. So if we have any questions from the audience here or online, you're welcome to pose your questions. Yeah, we had the question from Jason. That was the wish list. Yeah, maybe we can start from there. Anthony and Jamie.
I guess my tongue-in-cheek answer is I just want whiteboards everywhere. That would make me feel successful in a D-Stream class. But I think like my usual speech to students when they join my class is that my only goal is to make them not hate math more when they leave my class than they do the day they join my class. And I recognize kids love math coming into the classroom and some kids don't like math coming into the classroom, but I really try and reinforce the fact that when they leave, my goal is they like math just a little bit more. And I'm like 99% successful, I think. But I would hope that's the attitude for every math teacher. For kids coming into grade 9, I would wish that they all saw themselves as mathematicians, regardless of how much they love or hate the subject. I'd love it if they felt that they could do whatever math task that we were doing. And I would love it if, as a profession, we could find ways to make every task we do in a D-Stream class accessible to every student right at the beginning. And more whiteboards.
Hot tip, I got marker board from Lowe's, and it was fairly cheap, much cheaper than the official whiteboard, and we just started putting them up at wherever there was space available in classrooms. Yeah, that was pretty good. And of course the wipe books, but they're not that easy to get your hands on. Yes, I agree. Is this on? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Okay, so my wish list. So I'm thinking in terms of my wish list with respect to implementing, a de-streamed program, right? So, and I'm going to try to speak from my perspective and also the perspective of teachers that I work with. So I guess first, it's time for all teachers to get training in PD and to plan. And ideally, time for them to do that where they don't have to leave their class behind and go and do something, because a lot of teachers are reluctant to leave their class to do planning or to get training. So that's kind of a big one. Class size is a big one. I mentioned this earlier. We're now working with academic class sizes, where we were told that by our board at one time that they were going to take the average class size or the number of students they had been serving with applied classes and with academic classes and the numbers of teachers, and that ratio would be applied to the new D-Stream classes. And well, at that time they were talking about academic pathways in my board, so to the new academic classes. and we received that promise so many times. But so now what we have is larger classes than we had when we were just serving, you know, applied only students. So class sizes would help, right, in terms of that. And in my board and in some of the GTA boards, there's this, we've also de-streamed grade 10. Well, we've gone academic only. I like the idea of encouraging more students to do academic. I think that we should be moving most of our students towards there. I'm in favor of that. I think there needs to be a pressure relief valve. I think there needs to be an opportunity to support the students for whom that plan is not working well. I think it'd be nice to have, you know, something like an opportunity that's realistic for students, for schools to offer a bridge program before they enter grade 9. And I think that a pressure relief valve for kids who are really not prepared for 10 academic to be able to take a different course and serve their needs. And frankly, I think it'd be great if you could serve their needs well, and if they got out of, let's say, a locally developed program or a grade 10 applied credit, and then they said, hey, you know, this went so well, I think I'm ready to try 10 academic now. That would be a huge success. But by shoehorning everybody into a program that, you know, it doesn't necessarily meet their needs, I think that's problematic. So my wish list would be those, I guess, 3 things. You know, PD that suits teachers' ability to be with their students when they need to be with their students, but also all of our teachers. We've offered hundreds of teachers PD opportunities in our board, but not all of them have received training, and not all of them receive time in a way that they're able to use without having to leave the kids behind. So yeah, so PD, class size, and a pressure relief valve.
Thank you for your answers. I actually have 2 questions. Actually, Anthony started today's discussion saying or asking, is this streaming an answer? And I think it's not. And I will explain why I think it's not. As long as we have streaming that is considered as inclination of ability rather than interest, this streaming is not a solution, because students are, even if you start, if you de-stream in grade 10, they will go to grade 11 and 12, and they will be again in academic and applied will be considered less than academic, and so on and so on. So my question is, when did we start attaching ability to streaming? When? Because as mathematician, and I'm now inviting mathematicians in the audience to say something about it. As far as I know, applied mathematics is a very important part of mathematics. And actually, applied mathematicians are more wealthier than theoretical mathematicians. So when did we consider applied mathematics as a mark of something that is lesser and of a less ability? Because in other jurisdictions, if I can tell you, in Quebec, streaming is associated with interest in humanities, in natural sciences, in social sciences. In different countries, the same thing. So I think that Ontario got it wrong somehow, and maybe the whole Canada, I don't know, but I know about Ontario with associating streaming with ability. So that's my question.
Do you have answers?
I mean, I wonder a little bit how much of what you're talking about is associated with like what parents want for their kids and the value we place on the pathways that graduates from high school follow. Right? I think there's for some reason a higher value placed on going to university than there is than going to college than there is in going directly to the workplace or apprenticeship. And I think that perception of value is associated with why a student would be streamed into academic or applied. Why parents would be resistant to letting their kids follow an applied pathway or a college or a workplace pathway. And then, you know, the outcome of that is we're associating achievement with those pathways rather than interest. But I mean, I'd have to think about it more.
I'll contribute something to this. In my board, we're starting to do that well with respect to specialized programs. So it used to be, for example, if you wanted to go to a specialized art school, you would do an audition. Or if you wanted to get into an IB program, you would write a test or they would look at your grades. And now students just have to declare an interest. So I think that's a move in the right direction. Schools who have been offering these programs were losing their minds because they couldn't conceive of a different model, because they had always had this model where they could select the very best for their programs. And now they're being told that they're going to be randomly selected with criteria around balancing gender and racial distributions. But other than that, random selection. And so the only real criteria is demonstrating an interest. And I find that to be a really refreshing approach. And I think we need to be doing more of that. I can't answer your question with respect to when did we decide. I don't know. I know that Jason's done some work talking about it going all the way back to colonialism in Ontario. It seems like Ontario has a long history of streaming by ability. And one thing's for sure, I mean, the universities stream by ability. I mean, they accept, right? So, so then all of a sudden the grade 12 marks, well, that's how they stream, right? And the courses that they take in grade 12. So from that level, that's coming to us from the post-secondary realm, right? As for the origins, I'm not an expert. I hope somebody here can speak more to that, but you're right. I mean, the word applied is really, it's a euphemism, right? I mean, it's been used because they didn't want to say the weaker class, so they used the term applied. And the theory was at that time, back in 1999, is that there was going to be the applied and academic courses were going to be studying the same material in grade 9, and I think grade 10, but these students were going to learn it in a more academic way, and these students were going to do it in a more applied way, using their hands and whatnot. And then what ended up happening is it seemed as though the students who were in those applied courses didn't have the ability, so they started adjusting what was being covered. That's my understanding of how the recent history went down.
Any questions, comments?
Thanks. So I'll comment. Jamie mentioned having students sort of be like mathematicians. Yeah. And then, so there's this issue of ability, which the word Dragana used. So we've done some still quite preliminary work with grade 7 and 8. And we focus on what they can do rather than on what they know. That is to say, process rather than knowledge. And I want to ask the panel if they'd buy this idea. But we have found that students, we were working with a mixed grade 7-8 class, ordinary class, can do a lot of things you wouldn't think they could do. They're beyond grade level things, and they do it by playing, and they do it because we give them specific tasks. We're using Desmos, but other ideas, probability as well, so dice and stuff. Like, can you do this? And collecting data or something, and they do it. And they wind up doing a lot of things, and our idea is that understanding comes from doing, not the other way around. So trying not to teach them anything in that sense. And so the bottom line is, I'm thinking, students at that stage anyway, grade 7 and 8, can do a lot more than we'd ever think they could. And I wonder if that's anyone else's experience at any grade level. So that's my question.
Okay, we have a comment.
So I thought you were going to leave, but you
I know.
stayed.
I thought I was out, but they pulled me back in. But we just had this conversation. Yes. So my most formative experiences were teaching grade 7 and 8. What you said is absolutely true for that age and every age. And so a lot of times you see the self-efficacy beaten down in grade 7 and 8. At the same time, if you want to call it the ladder of abstraction going up towards, you know, algebra, like relationships more generally than operations, that ends up being like crashing into a wall at 100 kilometers per hour for a lot of students. But I wanted to build on what you said, because every single time it's true that they can do more than we think, every single time. And I already gave you my examples because I had to cover a kindergarten math for a whole year. And I did this counting song on my guitar. Kids talked about infinity. They're 4 and 5 years old. So I'm going to give infinity as an example, which we don't often talk about because we might consider it way up here. And then just the last couple of weeks, I've been going to grade 3. So like priority schools, Ministry of Education, math facilitation, as it's interpreted in Peel. And I just do a little talk to introduce myself, like, okay, you can build any number. You start with 1, 1 plus 1 plus 1. I'm writing out this sequence. I got it from Eugenia Cheng's latest book. And all of a sudden, every single classroom, a kid mentions infinity. They're 8 years old, every single classroom. So yesterday, it was even further because they were looking at inequalities, and I just drew a box, and then greater than, less than. We went to equals, and this kid put in the box on the whiteboard, little infinity sign plus little infinity sign equals, and it was like twice the size infinity sign on the right. And so over and over again, the belief that Peter has and I have been validated. It's just the structures that we have in place that haven't been able to validate them for all kinds of different reasons, whether it's grading or whatever. So I just wanted to fully agree with you. And then in the grade 9 de-streaming instance, we have kids that are just absolutely beaten down. And why would we ever want to say, no, you're at a deficit, which I think in part is maybe how the applied thing went wrong, because it was from the beginning, you know, like teachers weren't connecting it to applied mathematics, but they were just connecting it to a deficit. Jason Toe, it was on Twitter, he shared a paper, I think, that was underneath the TDSB, and it was essentially perceptions of students at what we see as lower socioeconomic levels. And he was just like, this study, it was in Scientific American, they published it, was just like, it hurts, right? For any teacher, it hurts, but it was the absolute presumptions that are being made of being at a deficit, just on that, maybe having more difficult life circumstances or having less money. But I just wanted to say all that because I totally agree, like Peter's got it right, and every single time there's more, every single time they have more to give, every single time. And so perceptions of deficit don't work. Like, that's my theme today, is why I asked about optimism versus pessimism. So proceeding from pessimism is almost guaranteed failure, in my opinion. I just see it over and over, and I don't think that's just education. I think that's any system, anywhere. So thanks for listening.
I kind of wanted to jump on that too, just with respect to like teacher attitudes and the benefit to students when they do have teachers that believe in them. You know, I use Thinking Classroom all the way up to calculus. Last year, teaching a calculus class, student in the room, not very strong at math, but I was in the habit of celebrating every little victory that she had when she could do the, you know, what some people might say the most basic thing, the derivative of x squared. She did it, I'd celebrate. She got a little bit more sophisticated, I'd celebrate, always with her. And finally one day she looked at me and she said, "You really love this stuff, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "It kind of makes me like it too." And, you know, in the work that I'm doing right now, like co-teaching with some other applied teacher, or sorry, de-stream teachers, you know, coaching them in Thinking Classroom and coaching them to almost take a step back from the reaction that I might have as a teacher to jump in there and solve the problem for the kids. I was working with one younger teacher and she was ready to go and like solve the problem for these groups, and I asked her to stop and stand back, and I said, "Just listen." And she listened, and I said, "What are the kids talking about?" And she goes, "Oh my God, they're talking about math." I said, "Yeah, they're talking about math." There was a boy in that room that she was telling me he doesn't do anything. He walks around, he wanders, he leaves to go to the bathroom. I said, "Look at him. what is he doing? She goes, oh my gosh, he's got the marker. He's doing the problem. I said, yeah, so let him do the problem. Let him enjoy it. And then go over there and tell him how proud you are of him for doing that. And it's like the attitude, celebrating all those little victories to convince kids that have been beaten down for whatever reason that they can be a good student. Not just a good mathematician, but a good student.
Thanks for the question, Peter. I agree that it's in those moments when we ask the right questions that leave room for student thinking. When we use the thinking classroom strategies, when I think back in the old days, there was the think literacy resources, lots of great strategies that leave room. And I love it when you see students that surprise you, that because when you're doing a teacher-directed activity, there's only so much room, right? I mean, the teacher's driving the train. It's when we open things up and we want to, when we get the chance to stop and listen to the student voices, that's when that really happens. And it's always delightful. And it happens at all grade levels and all different courses when the teacher makes space for it.
Any comments from the audience here? We do have two questions. Oh, Zach? Okay, go ahead. Okay, I'll get back to you then. So we have two questions, one from Joyce, the other from Pam. Joyce asked, though she says, thank you all of the speakers this evening, this morning. I appreciate the work everyone and the teachers are doing to navigate through the complexity of the de-streamed curriculum. As we heard from some of the speakers, there's a social justice equity issue related to streaming and de-streaming curriculum. I'm wondering, from research perspective and from practice, how are teachers saying or doing with regard to this issue? Do you have any response to that? Or I can, yeah, we did a little bit. So the next question from Pam, what are your perspectives on how this relates to students who want to go into trades, something we desperately need more of, where the math requirements are significantly different than students looking to go into university?
I'm going to try to speak to both the questions. The social justice, equity stance or lens for looking at mathematics, I rely on a book, and now the name's escaping me. It's something along the lines of an anti-racist approach to math classrooms. And one of my takeaways is learning what may be maybe a colonial way of looking at teaching and learning maths, and that is like a focus or an obsession on one way to get the one right answer, rather than allowing students to have multiple ways of representing their work. That could be, how when I learned math, it was sitting in a row, not talking to anyone, just listening to the teacher, writing down everything the teacher said, compared to what many of us in Ontario are trying to do, which is like a more group-centered, community-centered approach to a mathematics classroom, and trying to basically just unpacking the structures that exist in every classroom, in every school, asking why and asking who benefits and who's left out. That's what I try and do when I approach de-streaming and mathematics in general. With respect to the trades, the last 4 years of my career have been in an integrated STEM program where we were teaching math and tech design and geography and science all together, all the same time, all year long. It was awesome for the students because at any given point in the day, they didn't necessarily know what subject they were learning. They just knew they were doing stuff. And we're giving them big problems to solve. And I know this is beyond the scope of this forum, but I've come to believe that finding ways to integrate subject areas together and give students real problems with real stakeholders to try and solve is one entry point for students interested in the trades, students that might never have been exposed to a construction class, an auto shop class, never been exposed to building a robot, to give them a chance to get their hands on those things and play and find what they're interested in. You're actually talking about interest before, and you know, forcing students to take 3 math classes, there might be a good reason for that because we want them to learn critical thinking and problem solving. But what if we just let students explore courses based on their interests? Our job as teachers then becomes exposing kids to as many interesting things as possible so they can see how broad their interest could be.
I think as a result of the requirements to become a teacher, anybody teaching academic courses in elementary or high school did go to post-secondary school and probably went to university. And so we are automatically biased. And you almost have to train that out of yourself, right? As a society, and certainly in our school system, we don't honor the trades as much as we ought to. I can tell you from my own personal experience that 2 of the smartest people I know, and also the richest, you know, one's a plumber and one's installs furnaces, right? He's an HVAC technician. And boy, do they have money. They have oodles of money. And they're thoughtful, intelligent people. And they spend time thinking about and researching things that interest them. But they didn't go to university, right? And well, I think the HVAC technician went to college. But you know, the trades are a super important part of our society, and our school system and our society isn't producing enough people who honor that. And we need to do a better job in our schools, but it requires us to retrain ourselves, which is a difficult thing to do, right? Because all of us who are teaching math in high school were successful products of the education system. And so now we have to figure out how to teach in a way that wasn't done for us. So that's the challenge. I think that's very challenging.
We have a related question from Paul, related to Pam's question for the panel. We have seen a significant change in enrollment in college pathway courses. Now that the first cohort moves into grade 11, less students are selecting college courses. Is this being seen elsewhere? And what impact do you see this having? And we also have a comment. We'll do that.
Yeah,
later.
so I'm hearing from teachers across my board that students are showing up in grade 11 university math, and they're poorly equipped to handle the content of that course. There is a great deal of failure. The teachers are not as well prepared or well equipped to handle the different levels of ability. And so now they're playing catch up, and they're trying to figure out how to be more inclusive in their own teaching and practice. But it is definitely an issue that we're seeing. Students, we're doing all kinds of things to make students successful in grade 9 and 10. And now, and you know, I'm sure that some people would argue that this is a good thing, right? I mean, teachers are forced to reconcile their past practices with the current situation, and hopefully they're growing from the experience. But in the meantime, there's a lot of pain, and I don't know whether that's a good thing in the long term or not yet.
Hi, this is Zach Wolski. I have a question for teachers. In practice, are you seeing differences in the populations in your grade 10 and 11 academic applied courses, and also maybe your computer science programming courses, especially with respect to gender? And I think maybe it's probably too early to have like data collected, so I'm trying to get anecdotal things from people who are in the schools.
It's a good question. I'd like to find out.
Yeah, I don't even have good anecdotal data to share. I'm thinking about my most recent class that graduated last year who did not experience de-streaming. You know, there was 2 female students in particular that took the robotics course and the coding course in grade 12, and they were 2 of 16 in the class, right? So I would hope that as we do this, those kind of disparities change. There's always a lot of moving pieces involved in that.
As a computer science teacher, as well as a math teacher, I noticed that there tends to be a greater frequency of females in, say, the grade 10 level of the course, and that tends to slowly dissipate as we go to grade 11 and 12. Grade 12 would have like the biggest discrepancy, like noticeably bigger. Grade 10 and 11, not so much, right? They're about the same. But toward grade 12, like the people who want to graduate with a computer science, in my experience, have always been male for some reason. But that's I don't recall having any in the past 5 years any girls graduate.
I mean, I don't know who here would have heard this before, but the leaky pipeline in Ontario is grade 11 physics. It's where we see the most number of females stop taking those kind of courses. It's basically 50-50 in grade 9 and 10 math and science, and then when they hit university or college physics, that's where the numbers really change, and that continues to leak up until first year university.
If I can ask something about streaming, de-streaming. So far, we are considering streaming within a school. How about streaming schools and having special schools? And that may be one answer to what Pam was asking about, having more vocational schools. I'm coming from the system where students after compulsory first 8 grades in elementary school would go then into gymnasium, which was something that would lead to further education, or technical schools, or medical schools, or art schools. So we had special schools that would attract students with particular interests. And I don't think that we are considering that solution, or is that the solution at all for our system?
So in my board, we have a lot of schools in a very concentrated area. And so there's competition between schools, and they've started specializing sometimes by architecture and design, and sometimes just accidentally over time with history and reputations. But we most definitely have streaming in our schools, and it's more and more we're trying to make it based on interest, but it historically has been very much because of ability. And so, I mean, I've heard myths of like in places like Germany where they have these wonderful vocational programs where people really want to go because it prepares them for a great future and vocations. But it's not what I've been seeing in our little bubble. In our little bubble, we end up with the school for the dumb kids and the school for the kids whose parents want them to stay away from those ones. And I'm sorry, but that's kind of what it looks like. I like the idea that we're taking away auditions and tests to get into these specialized programs. So I hope that that's going to help with respect to that. But I mean, if you like the idea of vocational schools and academic schools, my concern is it might start to feel like the difference between the rich neighborhood and the ghetto, right? And that's kind of, you know what I mean? Like if it's not just on interest of students, but based on all these other societal factors, it has a real danger of becoming like that. So if you don't like driving through the ghetto, then you ask yourself, do you want your kid to go to that school? And so, I mean, that's the danger, right? If we could do it in that mythical way, that I think you're thinking about, or that I've heard about, where there are some societies that have built these school systems where kids who are interested in academics and thinking abstractly can go to this school, and students who are interested in vocational pursuits can go to that school, and everyone's happy and they're getting the, you know, a training that's going to serve them well in their future. Then I say, yeah, that's the system I want, right? But unfortunately, what I've seen sounds a lot like the streaming of schools you're talking about, but in a much more dystopian way.
I wonder too, I think about myself when I was in grade 8 going into grade 9, if I would have been mature enough to even know what I would have been interested in for post-secondary. I think my pathway would have depended on what my parents told me my pathway was going to be. If it was my choice, I'd be playing video games and basketball, right? Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Hi, my name is Margaret Karras, and I wonder whether there was any thought given to the consequences of de-streaming with respect to university pipeline. What is going to happen in the first year of university when the kids are coming from a de-streamed environment? How would the university be able to differentiate, distinguish between students coming in? Will they then now have to develop new programs?
I'm going to be a little cheeky, but like we need to ask the universities to maybe do just that and change. We're always told in high school to, right, to we gotta give them an exam because in university they're going to have an exam. We've got to make it super rigorous because in university it's going to be super rigorous. But from my perspective, we very rarely see it change from the university side, where the universities say, we have a population coming in that have been de-streamed, how are we going to change? They might have to. Again, going back to my experience with the program that I was running, we were being studied by a group of post-secondary institutions, University of Guelph, McMaster, and others that were interested in changing their entrance requirements to move away from a grade and move towards a portfolio. Because of some of the feedback that they were hearing from professors along the lines of, don't send me another student with a 99% average. I have enough of those. I need some students that can be comfortable with critical thinking, with solving big problems that don't have answers. So there is small examples of change, I think, from post-secondary. I don't know what it would look like for broader change or how we'd get started.
So it is quite common in the United States to have remediation programs in the universities. They're quite accustomed to it. And because admission to university is an open admission, generally, there is a pipeline from high school to a remedial program and then to a regular university program. Now, the problem is that the students rarely get out of remediation. They're stuck in it until they change their major. And so high schools get blamed for it because they don't produce students well enough prepared to enter university. Do you foresee this in Canada?
I mean, so you originally started asking about the effects on universities because of de-streaming. And I would argue that, I mean, there hasn't been, even in my board, there hasn't been de-streaming of grade 11 and 12. We have an assessment and evaluation document called Growing Success that tells us that the primary purpose of assessment is to inform instruction. But meanwhile, the universities are telling us, well, we're going to select our kids based on the marks that you give them. So Certainly the evaluation side of things is about ranking and sorting students still. Will the universities adjust? I sure hope so. I mean, I subscribe to your theory. Like, I think it'd be nice if they took into account some more tangible things. They often take the easy way out, right? Like they say, well, if we start with the very best students, best performing students, let's call them, then we'll be able to do greater things. I guess that's the theory that they're running with, right? But there's a lot of intangibles that they're not measuring. I've seen university programs that have very little need for courses like calculus and vectors, but they'll make it a required course simply so they can use it as a filter because they don't want to have to figure out which students to take. So they'll say, we have to do calculus and vectors. When my daughter was looking at universities, some of the programs required calculus and vectors for a zoology program. And I thought, well, there's probably some applications to calculus in the zoology program, but is that why they want it? Or are they just using it as a filter? Are they using us to help filter kids for their program? And I think that that's it's a poor approach to be taking. And I hope that they find reason to change their approach. The decisions that they make for selecting students shouldn't be what drives what we do in secondary or primary levels.
Another question, it kind of connects to this one, but it's along the lines of when in a lot of the discussion today, there's been a lot of focus on, in an integrated classroom, sort of the variance that you might see in the grade or the stress that comes from the grade, and ultimately in grade 12 that goes to the university. My question is, ultimately, can something like a micro-credential like concept, could that help in the situation where students would be able to demonstrate mastery of some concepts apart from their overall grade? And then if a student is continuing on in a D-stream context from grade 9 to 10 to 11 to 12, that they could still show that when they're going to their college, to the university. And some of the students who are maybe going to be inclined to go to university have more of those, or have the credits that are aligned to, you know, the micro credits that are aligned to things that they might want to do with a university education, and others might have others. Is that something that makes any sense at all in the context of Ontario classrooms?
I am a little like obsessed with the idea of teaching, like structuring high school around micro-credentials. I don't know what it would look like. It's an idea that feels good to me, because I think about the students we've been talking about today, the students that excel in math and they get to a D-stream class, and after a month, you know, they get it. They, you know, to make that student sit in that classroom for the rest of the semester feels like a punishment almost to me. And yeah, there's things we can do to enrich their experience, but what if enriching their experience said to us, like, you're going to take grade 10 math now? I also think about the student that struggles, and instead of needing 5 months to demonstrate they know the curriculum, they need 8 months. Well, what happens in our system right now is the semester ends and they fail. And what message does that send to the student about their value and their ability as a mathematician? I can picture what it would look like to have a micro-credential arranged, you know, high school diploma where they take, maybe they're interested in, yeah, let's figure out slope, and they get a micro-credential in slope, and then they want to try and do the micro-credential in lines, and then they realize math isn't for them, but there's 100 other micro-credentials they can take. Or they just get obsessed with that math learning, and they get all their micro-credentials all the way up to calculus, and you know, they're happy and we're happy, and it's a huge system-wide overhaul. But I think, to me, it's better than valuing the, like, you were in this class for 5 months and then you've got the credit.
Does anybody here online know anything about Mary Ward Catholic Alternative School? I know that I'm not from that board, but I know that they had a program where students could work at their own pace. And they worked with kits on each of the units or things they needed to study, and teachers were around to support them. I don't know whether they're still doing that. I know they were doing it 10 and 20 years ago. It's a fascinating idea. I mean, the idea that kids can learn at their own pace, right? We sort of have a factory model in education where we worry about timetabling. We have to timetable, students and teachers to be in a certain place at a certain time, and that presents the big challenge. I know Mary Ward had done something to try to address that issue.
Yeah, Paul just responded to what you just said. He said open timetable from that institution. We do have 2 comments from Frostina. So when Mohawk College did the math competition for only applied college stream high school students, it was meant to show how math is used in different program areas and professions. And there was nothing about how hard or easy questions were. Anecdotally, I had students who attended the competition to go into academic stream in following year. It would have been nice to follow up with these students and see if they continued to be successful. And then there's another comment from Frostina. Some colleges have done an extra bridge sort resources for either college-wide Humber College or a course-based Mohawk. Exactly for these reasons just mentioned, we have expected different population coming in, and we try to adapt. That's about it. Oh, there's one more. So Westmount HS in Hamilton is also self-paced, where students can go faster and finish slower. Okay, I can't read that. Finish early or slower, and continue into next term instead of failing. Yeah, so there's some. Yeah, Joyce. Joyce, you go ahead. There you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, good.
Okay. I have 2 comments. One comment, I'm going to flip to streaming. I think when we talk about the probably bad things about streaming, we always talk about the applied and whatnot. But we do not consider that also might have really negative impact to also academic students. And I think this is the work with Joe Boiler, which has been, talking about this idea of fixed mindset and growth mindset. And some of the students who go to the academic and go to the university and whatnot, they just go and come back with this fixed mindset. So I think we need to consider that part of the population as well, not just, the applied or, others. That's one comment. And the next comment, I want to go back to the comment I talked earlier about the social justice and equity. I think one thing that I noticed, we take for granted, since mathematics became a school subject, we take for granted the relationship between our students and the mathematics. For the most of, or many of them, mathematics is an alien. It's just a school subject, and it's just something that they do to pass through the education system, and that was it. I recently was teaching a course, I'm teaching actually currently a course. It's a very new course as an elective for pre-service students, our concurrent students in ethnomathematics. It was designed with my colleague, Stephen. One thing that I know, what we've done, we just went to the history of mathematics. We started from Egypt, multiplication and, area of dividing. We went to China, we went to Europe, Italy, Fibonacci. We go around Africa, fractals from Ron Egash and whatnot. I will tell you, one day, one of my pre-service students screamed and said, "Oh my God, I am changed. I am changed." Because they could appreciate this mathematics we're talking about is part of our heritage. Every one of us here sitting is part of our heritage. So I'm wondering also, and I liked this idea of social emotional skill, and part of it has to do with mathematical identities. Maybe we need to put more work on that to bring the students to identify themselves with mathematics and to see it as part of their heritage. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce.
Okay, I want to read to you one example from India, actually. I think a very interesting way of solving some of these problems. In India, a typical secondary school covers grades 9 to 10, while higher secondary school covers grades 11 to 12 and prepares students for post-secondary education. While at the higher secondary school, students choose between the commerce and the science stream. So they stream students then. The mathematics content for both is the same. That's interesting. In terms of mathematics curriculum, it is de-streamed completely, but they add additional courses. For example, it may be economics course in the economics stream that contains some mathematical content related to that interest. Or if you're interested in history, you can do maybe history of mathematics as additional course. I'm just saying we should also explore some other possibilities and look into how it is done in the world.
Any comments on that?
So at the risk of, I'm now talking out of my wheelhouse, but isn't that part of the world also sort of famous for class difference and sort of caste systems? And I would be concerned that while they've de-streamed what they're doing in terms of whether they choose science or commerce, they've probably also discarded 70% of the students and said, okay, well, further education is not for you. So I don't know. So I'm making a conjecture here, but that would be my concern. Is that okay? Once they've separated out the students that they're no longer going to deal with, then they've said, okay, all the mathematics is going to be same from here forward. Possibly that might be what's going on.
I remember, Paul, you had some questions earlier this morning. Do you want to ask your questions now? Okay, is Paul there?
I'm not too sure if you can hear me.
Yes.
Oh, good. I did ask them in the chat. I appreciate that. No, I don't have anything else. Thanks, though.
All right. Other comments and questions, reflections?
I have a question, Brian Markle from Humber College. Why not remove complexity when it's not really needed? Like, for example, do we want to teach long division where you can just use a calculator, right? And so, say for optimization problems, you can teach that you can find a maximum, or for quadratic, there's be a maximum or a minimum in places where they cross the x-axis, but have the students use the tool to find the roots instead of teaching them the complex solution. And maybe that would make things more equal just by removing unnecessary complexity.
Yeah, I agree completely. We use computer algebra systems to make some of the curriculum more accessible. The other example you used, I mean, we don't have to select only the most complex versions of a problem. We talked about differentiation strategies. I mean, you can differentiate both from an instruction point of view, but we've had to develop ways of differentiating our assessment as well, so that if we want to elicit from students, give them a chance to demonstrate thorough understanding, then maybe we do give them those more complex tasks. But we can address the same curriculum expectations at much lower levels. And so we're learning to do that. We're learning to offer the simpler version as a choice. One of the, the 10, one of the things that, that Doug mentioned and Jason Toe mentioned earlier is student choice. And so if we only offer them one choice, and if the choice is a question that's insurmountable, then that can be kind of debilitating. And we're not testing what students know at that point. We're trying to determine what they don't know. I don't think that's ever a good idea.
And that very thing is exactly how I spiral my curriculum when I'm teaching. I would start with, let's find the x-intercepts with Desmos. Cool, click, click, done. Do it again, click, click, done. And then if we've done that enough and I've done a good job, I could then pose to the class, I wonder how we'd do this if we didn't have Desmos. And more often than not, a good portion are hooked just by that prompt, and we can figure it out together. And the students who might have been struggling, who needed Desmos to do it, they could be there as the check, or they might be engaged enough to engage with the factoring mathematics more and go deeper and deeper and deeper. So I love starting like that.
Yeah. Anyone with a lightning question? No? Okay. Thanks, everyone. Well, especially thanks to the panelists today, the speakers this morning, and also the participants. Lots of really good discussion today that I think has allowed us all to kind of leave this room with a much kind of richer appreciation for what is happening in terms of the progress and the path forward for de-streaming. Seems like a far from perfect or simple solution or problem that's being worked through in the province. Again, we're going to be meeting as a forum next time. It's going to be, as I mentioned at the beginning of the day, through the CMS session. So we're going to be connecting there. It's going to be a much more mathematically oriented conversation for those who are interested in that side of things. And also we have our research day coming up, but we'll probably be back in person either in January or in February for those who are buying train tickets. I noticed there were some folks coming in from out of town, so just as a heads up. And thank you.